Welcome to Secured Sessions, the podcast with no niche. You can find us on Instagram, YouTube, and stream our episodes on Apple Music and Spotify with new releases every single Tuesday. So for today's guest, this is a really big moment for me, very sentimental and pivotal, I think, for the podcast and in my career. 25 years ago, he started a company that will bring in $200 million this year alone. 3 years ago, he took a chance on me and undoubtedly changed the trajectory of my entire life, along with countless others. Whether you know him from the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, podcast with Ed Milet, Jordan Belfort, and more, or this is your first time being introduced to EDWIN ARROYAVE, you will undoubtedly leave this episode better than you came. Please welcome to Secured Sessions, the millionaire business tycoon who treats the newest sales rep just as kindly as the VP, to answer 25 questions for 25 years of Skyline Security, my self-made mentor, EDWIN ARROYAVE. Woo!
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Rebecca.
Yeah,
it's an honor to be on your podcast.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
And great introduction, by the way. That might be one of the better introductions I've had. So
thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
That means a lot because I know you've been on a lot of podcasts. So I know, speaking of which, a lot of listeners have heard your story, but for those who haven't, it's very, very inspirational. So would you mind kind of sharing your upbringing, leading you into your entrepreneurial journey and where we are today?
Sure. So I was born in Bogota, Colombia. I came to the U.S. when I was 6 years old. My parents and I and my older sister, and we came in search of that American dream. But unfortunately, that American dream became an American nightmare because due to some unfortunate circumstances, our family lost everything we had. So much so that at the age of 15 years old, I had to become basically the head of household. And at the time, I was lucky enough to get a job working at a call center, which was not a very ideal job for me with how shy and timid I was. But I quickly got the courage to do this job I did not want to do, just out of my desperation, because I wanted to help my family out. I was tired of seeing my mom at the end of the month not be able to pay for the rent. At the end of the month, we would run out of food because we were on food stamps. I was tired of my siblings, mother and I, living in this tiny little bedroom without windows. And lastly, I was just tired of roaches waking me up in the middle of the night. So really, the avoidance of pain is what caused me to take action towards something that really demanded more than I thought I was worth. Because again, the last thing I wanted to do was talk to people over the phone when I couldn't even complete sentences. But even though I was very shy and I was very timid, the one thing I did have going for me is that I was a big, big dreamer. And when my mom would go and clean offices, that's what she did. And she'd also go door to door. She'd sell Stanley products going door to door. So she sold office products like cleaning material. So when she'd go work, I'd stay at my house because on vacation, I didn't even know what a camp was. Back then, when we were on vacation, I just stayed home by myself.
Right.
And I would just visualize all day on how one day I was going to make $100,000 a year by the age of 21 years old. And I became obsessed with that. And again, I had two things going for me. I was a big dreamer, and I always felt like God was with me. And the reason I always felt like God was with me was because one of the great things my mom did is she always poured life into me by telling me that, God is with you, and one day you're going to be so successful that you're going to talk about how the main reason you were successful is because God has always had a blessing on you. And I began to believe that at a very, very young age. So at 15 years old, when I got this job at the call center, I thought to myself, okay, if I'm going to make $100,000 a year by the age of 21 years old, I guess I got to become the manager by the age of 18 years old. And then I started focusing on the only two things that I could control, which was my attitude and my activity. And because I had a very low identity of myself, again, I was very shy and I was very timid, I became obsessed with just preparation. And I became obsessed with doing all the things that most people didn't want to do. And I started doing all the boring stuff. And I started, for example, just showing up every day. Most of the people that had way more talent than me wouldn't show up on Saturdays like I showed up on Saturdays. They used to have these like leadership development trainings. I would show up to all of them. They used to do role playing. And while most of the people that were way more talented would not really pay attention to that, I was literally role playing the entire time. And when I started doing these little things that they weren't willing to do, I started to get confidence from it. And then I went to the top sales rep at the time, and I had a Radio Shack recorder. You know, this will date me from back in the day, but I said, I went with my recorder. I said, hey, can you record your presentation for me? And he recorded his presentation. I remember I wrote the thing down word for word, and then I would role play his presentation, and I would say it over and over, word for word. And the guy was like super cool. Like, you know, he was, not only was he the top sales rep, but like everyone wanted to sort of be like him. And I basically just took the confidence that he had, and I got his confidence just because I started talking like him. I started saying exactly like what he was saying. And I started to believe that maybe I could make this happen. And sure enough, I'd started out working everybody. So most people, the other thing that happened is I was starting to get sales, and most people, we would work till 9 p.m. So most people at 9 p.m. would just, you know, clean and leave, right? They'd finish, and I wouldn't leave until I actually hit my goal, because they gave us goals at this call center. And I remember my goal was always 25 a day. And I would stay there till 9:45 until I got my 25. And those were very important times for me, because, you know, if you're ever going to be ready for the big time, you have to be ready with the small things, right? And I became, at a very young age, I became pretty disciplined with doing all the small little things that most people didn't want to do. And instead of getting fatigued by it, I got energized by it, because most people don't want to do the boring stuff.
Right.
And what came out of that is I became the youngest manager in company history.
Amazing.
But not really because I was the most deserving, but it was because the 6 people that were way more deserving had better communication skills, had more seniority than me, were just, again, better communicators. They all got fired for doing things they shouldn't have been doing at the time. And I got my chance at 18 years old. So that's kind of where it all started. And that was obviously a big moment in my life, because it was the first time that I truly began to believe in myself. And I think that other than hope, and hope is the desire to want to do something great with your life, faith is the expectancy that it's going to happen. Faith is also the positive mental attitude, right? Turning a negative and turning it into a positive. 90% is winning. To me, faith is also, for me, I'm a follower of Christ, and knowing that God is with me. But also, even if you're not faith-based, faith is just the projection of the most beautiful thing for the future, the most positive thing for the future. The opposite of that is fear, which is the worst possible thing for the future. But if you look at both things, they both haven't happened yet. So for me, if I was going to believe in something, I might as well believe in the positive than the negative. They both haven't happened yet, so I might as well focus on faith. And then the last thing is you need to believe in yourself. And the reason that's important is because you can only receive what your mind can accept. So if your mind can't accept something, it's never going to get it. So the way that you start to believe and the way you increase your self-worth is by putting yourself in circumstances that demand more than you think you're worth. And then when you succeed at those circumstances, what happens is your belief level now goes to a new level, and belief drives everything. So at 15 years old, when I put myself in that circumstance that demanded more than I thought I was worth and succeeded at it, it untapped a new level. And that's when I really began to believe. And that's really when my life changed, is when I started to believe in myself.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. So with that said, now that you've attained this level of success, and we'll kind of backpedal a bit and kind of go more through the story, but what's your purpose? Why do you think you're here? Why do you think you were put in the position that you're in?
So I think your purposes change at different times of your life. You know, I remember my first purpose was I wanted to take care of my mom. And, you know, she was my hero, still is my hero. And I wanted to be able to buy her dream house, because the fight that my mom and dad would have all the time was we could never buy a house because we could never prove where the income was coming from. And another big why for me, a big purpose for me, was my dad. When he went to jail when I was 10 years old, I promised him that he asked me if I could become, this is your time to become the man of the house. And I gave him a promise, which was that I was going to be the man of the house and I was going to take care of the family. But I also promised him that when he got out of jail, he'd never have to work a day in his life, so that he wouldn't have to get back into the industry that landed him in jail. And then I always had these big dreams. Like, I wanted a house that overlooked the entire city, and I wanted to have a house on the beach that was on the sand, and I had these huge dreams. So that was, you know, at the beginning I was driven by a lot of the material stuff, right? And then it made me very successful, right? But then I think, you know, the material would drive you until it doesn't. Then the spiritual will drive you, and then, you know, you can't fill spiritual void with physical things. So I think now I'm at a point in my life where what drives me is, you know, there comes a point where the money's not going to drive you as much anymore, right? Like, that just becomes a byproduct. But for me now, it's being able to kind of pay it forward and give people the same opportunity that I was given. Right. Where one person basically changed my life forever. You know, I told you about my being 15 years old and getting this job at a call center, but what I didn't tell you is that I originally got declined at like 16 job interviews before that. Oh, wow. And the reason I did was because I was so shy and timid that during the interviews, I would get nervous and I couldn't complete sentences, and I would start stuttering. And then I'd get really nervous when I'd start stuttering, and then I'd get in my head about it. So I start sweating. I get really, really hot, and then I'd start sweating. So no one would hire me. They probably thought I was on drugs or something. God. And my friend at the time that I was going to high school with, that knew my situation, was like, hey, I found this job. They hire anybody. Just show up and they're going to hire you. And I said, how do you know they're going to hire me? He says, well, I've sent the last 7 people there. They've all gotten hired. So they're going to hire you. There you go. I said, are you sure? He's like, yeah. So I drive to this job interview, and I have obviously a beat up Nissan Sentra that my mom lent me, and it had no air conditioner, didn't work. So I had to like roll the windows down. And no. I drove to this job interview. I had like my white collared shirt, like the one you're wearing. Right. And I remember coming to this interview, I was already kind of hot. And I was like, oh God, please don't let me sweat today. And 2 minutes into the interview, the guy's handing me over a paper towel. And when he hands me over the paper towel, I'm like, oh shoot, he's noticing it's happening again. He is actually noticing that I'm sweating. So then I start sweating even more. Oh, no. And by the end of the interview, that white shirt, like the one you have, is like drenched in sweat, and you could see through it. And then of course I don't get the job. So now I'm walking back to my car, and I stop by the restroom to kind of clean myself up, wash my face. And I remember just start praying to God. I said, God, I just need a shot. Give me an opportunity. I promise you I'll work harder than anybody's ever worked. And I'll promise you that I'll always praise your name, but I need to help my family out. And as I got out of that restroom, there was a gentleman outside. And he says to me, hey kid, when do you start? I said, I don't start. You guys are completely full. He starts laughing, and he's like, who told you that? And I said, well, the guy I just interviewed with. He says, that's not true. Come with me. And he takes me to the HR room, and he says, hey, I need you to hire this kid. I need him to start tomorrow at 3 p.m. And that person is the same person that 6 years later helps me start, you know, Skyline Security. So I'm a byproduct of one person giving me a shot, and I'm a firm believer that in life people just need a shot. People need a system. People need a leader that believes in them, that's going to be patient with them, that's going to show them how to do it. And now that's what drives me. I get to do that for people, and I get to pay it forward. And it's the best feeling that you could ever have, is that fulfillment. Yeah. Well, then you're going to love this, because for those of you that don't know, I work for Edwin's company, Skyline Security, right?
And I have heard you tell this story a few times, but the interesting thing is being here sitting with you, connecting it to myself and my journey, it's so similar. I went to college, I graduated, I was in med sales. It wasn't for me. I needed a vehicle, basically. And I applied so many places, but they wanted experience. But how do you get experience without first getting hired, right?
Right.
Kind of a vicious cycle. So I ended up finding Skyline.
Yeah.
And you guys gave me that chance. And I remember praying, just like you just said, thinking, man, if I just had a vehicle, if I just had some sort of vessel, a way to show my full potential where I can just put all my energy in this, all my time, I know for a fact I will be successful.
Right.
And it's exactly what happened. It was just a manifestation. And next thing I know, I get connected to Nico, kind of how Nico got connected to you via social media. And it has been the most life-changing vehicle that I ever could have fathomed and imagined.
Yeah.
And now I have the ability to do just what you said for other people as well, for my family members, for Ian here.
Yeah.
And it's just really cool hearing you say that that's kind of how it started for you. Just someone gave you a chance.
Yeah.
And you guys did that for me. So I think it's a really beautiful full circle moment. For sure.
Yeah, no, it's, I think what makes great what we do is that it gives everybody a platform.
Yeah.
You know, I think when you look at our company, we have all walks of life. I mean, we got 18-year-olds doing very, very well. We got 60-year-olds doing very, very well. We got women, we got men, we got just, it's so diverse. And I think that's one of the things that I'm very proud of is that, you know, a lot of industries, you know, like medical sales, like if you don't have the background, if you don't have the education, you know, if you don't have the right connections, you're not going to get in there. And that's a lot of all the, I guess what people would think are great sales opportunities. If you don't have the right connections, you're not going to get in there. And with our opportunity, it gives everyone a shot that just has the desire to want to do something great. And it pays you just as much and more than a lot of those glamorous type of sales positions that you would think of.
Yeah, 100%. I remember when I first told my parents that I was going to do door-to-door sales after graduating college, coming from med sales, they were terrified. I think conventionally, you know, they want you to be a doctor, a lawyer, a surgeon. But the thing is, through knocking doors here, you can make well above what a doctor, lawyer, surgeon may and have the work-life balance. But enough about the company though for now. How did you overcome that social anxiety? Because I know you said you were sweating in the interview. So how did you go from that kid who was nervous, sweating through his shirt, to somebody who can speak on stages and run a whole company? What was kind of the pivotal moment for you, or what changed mentally?
Well, I think at a younger age, you know, one of the great things that the company that the call center that I worked for did for me was that before we would get on the phones to sell, they would give us these leadership development courses that we'd take for an hour a day, every day, before we'd get on the phones. And really, that gave me a lot of confidence because, again, everything comes down to belief. And in life, you'll experience that which you are deeply convinced with. And what happened is I started learning all these things at such a young age on mindset that it made my mind believe like, well, maybe you deserve more, right? Now, one of the mistakes I made is that at 21 years old, I stopped. And for 20 years, I never touched a book again. I never worked on my mindset again. And that's because that's the problem sometimes when you have total freedom, is now I had total freedom and I was like, yep, I don't like that school stuff. That's not for me. I did it before because they were paying me, but now that they're not paying me, I don't want anything to do with it. And a lot of that came from, I just didn't want to be reminded of, at the time, I thought I wasn't very smart. And the reason I didn't think I was very smart was because I graduated with a 1.8 GPA. So the school system kind of made me believe that I wasn't smart because I wasn't a guy that passed tests and I didn't have a great grade point average.
Conventionally intelligent, right?
Yeah. In fact, I never took the SAT because of that. I was so afraid that I was going to score such a low score that I'm like, I'd rather not know.
Right.
And so anyway, it wasn't until 20 years later that the self-limiting belief started to resurface itself. And it started to resurface itself because we started doing so well at the company in 2016 that my mind couldn't accept anymore the kind of money that we were making. So this little voice started talking to me again and kept getting louder and louder, which was, you're not that smart. You've been getting lucky this entire time. People are going to, now I was hiring people that were way smarter than me.
So like imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome, for sure. And it kept getting louder. And because of that, I ran away from being a leader. And that year, I maybe had 2 meetings with my entire team.
Wow.
And I started to self-sabotage my life. And what happened was the first time in 17 years that I couldn't accept the success I was having. And when that happens, you'll self-sabotage yourself to come back down to what you really think you're worth. And at the time, I knew what the problem was. I needed to work on my mind again. And I picked up a book for the first time, and it was called 10X by Grant Cardone. And at first, I couldn't read it, obviously, because I wasn't a good reader. So I tried getting the audio version, and then I couldn't retain that either. So then I literally wrote the entire book out. So I'd hit play, then stop, and I'd write it down. Hit play and stop, write it down. And that's the way I was able to retain it. And the cool thing is, once I went through the entire book, I realized everything that's in this book, I've already accomplished. I just didn't know how to explain it. I didn't know how to articulate it. And then from there, I was like, okay, I'm going to go back to studying on my mind 1 hour a day, no matter what. The same way I work out in the gym, I'm going to work out on my mind because it's what I used to do at 15 years old. And then I started studying people like Ed Milet, and I started to realize that everything he was talking about, I had also experienced. And see, you don't believe something in your heart until you actually experience it. Until you experience it, you can talk about it all you want. You're not really going to believe it.
Sure.
But when you experience it, you'll truly believe it. And what happened was, through Grant, through Ed Milet, I thought to myself, these guys are worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I've done the same thing they've done. I guess I must be worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And when you can get your subconscious mind to align with what you're saying consciously, all the right people will start showing up to make those dreams that seem impossible into a possibility. So at 2015, I went in front of the whole company and I said, we're going to be this $100 million company. The problem is I didn't believe it. I didn't believe it. Deep down, my subconscious mind didn't believe it. And your subconscious mind will always prove itself right. And in 2016, it tried proving itself right, which is, you're not worth 100 million, you're worth like 20 million. So go self-sabotage yourself to go back down to that level. And again, it wasn't until I took action towards that fear that everything, changed for me. So that's why at our company, I'm so big on leadership development, because you could have all the talent in the world to make $1 million a year, 8 figures a year. But if your mind can't accept it, you're never going to get it. You'll always self-sabotage to come back to what you think you're worth. So just from experience, that's why for me, I'm so passionate about our team and just people in general, whether you're part of Skyline or not, to work on their mindset. So that's been a huge, probably the biggest secret of my success is that. And then the other thing is the preparation that I talked about earlier, where with me, like even as far as like being able to tell my story and articulate, and when I get on stages and I have to give a 45-minute presentation or a 30-minute presentation, believe it or not, I script the whole thing out. Like I write it the way I want to say it, because there's so many things that I want to say that I want to make sure if you only have 30 minutes, you can talk about in 30 minutes. And then I'll role play it, and I'll say it word for word, and until I have it memorized. And then once I have it memorized, I can internalize it, and then I can personalize it. It's no different than when I started selling, long distance over the phone. I was very shy, I was very timid. But when I knew what I was talking about, and where I knew where I was going and why I was doing it, what happens is you'll operate out of certainty. And when you operate out of certainty, your enthusiasm naturally will come out. And the more certain person will always influence the less certain person. So even though I wasn't a great communicator at the time, you could work your way into being a good communicator. And everything, again, is belief. And if you have that conviction, you'll be able to influence people. People don't have to believe what you're saying. People just have to believe that you believe what you're saying. So I've always been very intentional about filling myself up with belief. The belief would come with preparation for me. I remember when I started selling door-to-door, selling alarm systems, before I'd go sell alarms, I literally would look at articles to fill my belief level up. And I would look at articles of how many people were getting broken into, all the fire accidents that were happening, all the deaths that were happening because of carbon monoxide. And what that did was it was giving me conviction that I was saving people's lives.
Sure.
Like the money, again, was just a byproduct. It really became, hey, if you don't get this, there's a good chance you're going to get broken into. That's what my mind thought. That wasn't what I was telling people, but I believed that they really needed it. And I think that's what made me good at what I did. It wasn't necessarily that I was a great salesperson. It's just that I believed it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So personally, I don't think I've ever asked you this, and I haven't heard it asked, but why security? Out of everything that you could sell, why home security?
It's a great question, because the VP of sales, the guy that gave me the opportunity, right? He came to my office when I was 21 years old, and he said, Edwin, I'm going to resign. He said, I can't guarantee you the $70,000 a year that you make here, but if you make this work, you can possibly double, triple, quadruple what you make here. And I always thought, if you have common sense and you have drive, you should go a long way in life. And that's what I did. I used common sense. I said, this guy's making 250 grand a year. He's resigning because he thinks he could make millions in the security industry, which at the time, people were only focusing on selling security to affluent people. And we thought, well, why don't we just sell security to middle class, lower income communities, because they're the ones that probably need it the most. And I knew that firsthand because I'd been robbed at gunpoint at 18 years old. And where I grew up, there was burglaries happening all the time.
Right.
So it made sense in that, again, he thinks he can make millions. He's making 250 grand a year. So I thought to myself, even if he just mentors me and I could make the kind of money he's making, that's kind of the mentorship I've been looking for. And then third was, I was a big dreamer, right? So I knew this is the way that I can make my dreams happen. So, but that's how I got introduced to security. It wasn't really my idea, but it was an opportunity that I got. And I think in life, you'll have opportunities that can change your life forever. But sometimes if you don't take them, the purpose of a goal is not necessarily to accomplish it, but it's to become the person that attempts it.
Absolutely. So passing that on to people and being a good leader yourself, what do you think are the traits that make a good leader versus potentially a bad one or one that may fail? I know we've seen a lot of people come and go, you more than me, obviously, over the years. So is there a common theme between the ones that succeed and the ones that don't?
Yeah, man. Well, number one, I think the number one rule that I think you, as a leader, it's not about yourself, right? It's not about your greatness. It's about the greatness of others, right? And I think, as simple as this sounds, the way I've always liked to lead is by taking care of people first and being sort of a servant leader. The reason I've been able to do that is because I've always had a long road approach to it. My whole goal was to make decent money for a long time, to outlast the competition. And it was never short term. Every decision I made has always been long term. And I felt like if I could take care of people first, I will eventually win in the long run. And I think one of the ways that, as a leader, you're able to take care of people first is just by being a person of truth, right? And I think a person of truth is someone that keeps the promise that they make to people, no matter what, even if it means that sometimes you might lose money over it. But if you said you're going to do something, you do it, you keep that promise you made to the individual. I think truth is about being transparent and having a vision about where you want to go with the company. I think truth is unlocking people's gifts. You know, I think one of the greatest things you can do as a leader is be a gift finder and help people identify their gifts, because I think everyone is given these gifts that God has placed in their heart, and it's our job to find out what those gifts are. And as a leader, if you can help your juniors find those gifts, it unlocks this greatness that they have in them. Another part of truth is helping people identify their why, you know, and like, why is it that, like, what drives them? And the only way you could find out what their why is by getting to know them. And I think once you have truth, you also create emotion. As a leader, you have to create emotion in people. And the way you create emotion in people is by showing them how much you care about them and why you believe in them.
Absolutely.
Right. And then the last thing I'd say on that is your credibility and reputation is everything as a leader, right? So are you living what you're saying? Are you just talking about it, or are you actually living it? Like, what are your core values? If you're a person of truth, are you really living by truth, right? Are you really living by, you know, serving others and stuff like that? So, and then once you have that, now it's about keeping people loyal. And I think one of the ways that you keep people loyal as a leader is by education. If you educate people, and as long as they could validate that what you're saying is true, when you educate people, you become an expert in their eyes and you have credibility now. And the other thing that happens with that is, with education, it also creates empathy, because when you are training someone, and you'll know this very much because you've been a great trainer out in the field and a great leader, is when you go out there with your team and you go down to their level and you're with them in the trenches, you get to have this bond with them and you get to show them that you do care, because you're feeling what they're going through. Like, you're out there going through the struggle with them, and that creates empathy, right? And that's part of that education. And I think the values and the inefficiencies, and you could only get the inefficiencies when you're in the trenches with people, when you're leading by example. And because of that, it also shows extremism, which is, it shows people that you're willing to go the extra mile for them. Because if you notice, not a lot of people are willing to educate you, because it takes time, it takes patience. It takes a lot of patience, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And not a lot of people are willing to do it. So when you do it for people, it creates loyalty. And it's when you stop educating people is when they end up leaving you.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so important as a leader to continue to grow, because if you stop growing, guess what? Now they'll stop growing.
Right.
And then eventually, if you're not teaching them new things, they're like, well, what do I need you for?
Yeah, absolutely. No, it makes perfect sense. And I think it's interesting that you say that too, because oftentimes when you grow within this industry, people try to recruit you, right? Other companies, other teams, and it happens to me all the time. Yeah. But what I tell them is, you know, Edwin has been there for me through, you know, the whole journey since the beginning. So I couldn't see myself ever leaving, regardless of the pay, regardless of whatever that might entail. Having that leadership in place and someone who's been present the entirety of the journey means more than any monetary gain from another company, to me at least. Yeah. And I would assume to most. So I completely agree with that. With that said, you know this, some people don't, but I talk about it pretty openly, mental health in sales. So when I started the journey, of course, coming into door to door, it was something very new. It can be a little bit emotionally taxing, but there was a time where I had a bit of a lull. And you know that because you checked on me without me asking you to, which again is a sign of a great leader. What would you say to people that are in sales that might be struggling with their mental health? How have you dealt with that? And what do you think is a way to create longevity in this industry with that in mind?
Yeah, great question, by the way. I think a big part of mental health in the sales industry, I think one of the issues that you have in the sales industry is that, you're able to make so much money in such a small period of time that then you take too much time off. And I think idle time, there's a verse in the Bible that talks about an idle mind is the devil's playground. And I think it's so true. Like every dumb decision I've ever made, and I've made a lot of them, has been because I had too much time in my hands. And when you're not getting things done and you're not really accomplishing anything, you start to go a little stir crazy. You start to get a little anxiety, and you start to eventually even fall into a depression, right? And that's why I think it's important to always have a purpose. No matter how successful you are, no matter how old you are, how young you are, you should have hope, right? Hope is something that you're looking forward to. Hope is a big dream, right? It's a God-sized dream. Hope is a purpose. That purpose is always going to come with a problem. You can't have a purpose without a problem, right? So problems are a good thing. The same way purpose will keep you alive, problems will also keep you alive. So if you think about it, if you don't have problems, that means you don't have any resistance. That means you get bored of the game of life. Like anything that's easy, you get bored of, whether that's a relationship, whether that's in sports. If we're playing basketball and I'm winning and I'm beating someone 15-0, I'm having fun, but eventually I'm not going to want to play that game because there's no challenge, right? So I think if you don't challenge yourself, then you'll never unlock the greatness that lies within. And I think if you don't challenge yourself, again, you can't grow. And if you really think about, there's two things that give you fulfillment: growth and contribution. Well, the only way you can grow is by challenging yourself. So what happens is you have this purpose, you have this challenge, your job is to solve it. And then once you solve it, you have what's called, I call it restricted freedom. And the reason it's restricted is because you can only have so much freedom for so long. And while you have it, that's where you get to reward yourself. So you accomplish something, you reward yourself, you become present in the celebration, you celebrate, you're present in that celebration, you have an explosion of enthusiasm, you're happy, you're feeling great. But then what will happen is you'll begin to plateau and you'll begin to decline. And then that's when you got to find a new purpose, right? And now that creates a new surge in your life. And then that'll come with its new problem. And then you do it all over again. What happens if you don't find a new purpose, Rebecca, when that happens is, if you don't find a new purpose, you'll have what's called total freedom. And total freedom, contrary to what everyone has told us all our life, is not good for you. Because when you have total freedom, you don't have a purpose. And if you don't have a purpose, you don't have problems. And if you don't have a purpose and problems, you can't create. And we were put on earth to create. And it's whenever we don't create that we start to go stir crazy and we start to get that anxiety and things like that. And here's the other issue. If you don't have a purpose, then instead of having good problems, you'll have what's called bad problems. Bad problems are the ones that you create because you don't have a purpose, right? So you have to have a balance of all three going at the same time. You need a purpose, you need problems, and you need a restricted freedom. But if you don't have all three, for instance, you have no purpose, then you just have problems. What does that mean? Well, I'm bored out of my mind. So you know what? I'm going to pick up the alcohol. I'm bored out of my mind. So I'm going to go cheat on my girl. I'm bored out of my mind. So I'm going to just do dumb stuff, right? Where if you have purpose, you don't got time for any of that crap. It's when you have all this time to yourself that you start to overthink stuff. Think about when you overthink, it's always negative shit.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, when have you overthought positive stuff?
It would be nice, but
You don't, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like, oh, I love you. You can't sit here for hours and just be like, man, I love my life. I love my family. Like, you don't do that. You always overthink all the negative shit. And that thing you'll be able to overthink for days and weeks.
Tell me about it.
Right? So that's the importance of always having a purpose. So purpose comes with problems. Your job is to solve them. And then you have what's restricted freedom. And then once you have it, you solve it, it's time to find a new purpose. And that, by the way, you do in all areas of your life, right? So you might be killing it in business, but now you challenge yourself maybe in fitness.
Sure.
And you try to challenge yourself in fitness. Maybe you're killing it in fitness and finance. Well, maybe you want to challenge yourself with family.
With the podcast.
With the podcast, right? Or you could be killing it in all those areas and you're like, all right, I'm going to challenge myself with my faith. I want to get closer to my faith. And you start, challenging yourself there. But the idea is that you want to continue to grow until your last days on earth. That's why success is not a destination. Success is, for me at least, it's becoming the best version of yourself. And what happens is every time you find a new version of yourself, like the new best version of yourself, it untaps a new level of belief that makes you go even higher. So example, at 15 years old, I used to dream of the life that I have today.
Yeah.
But I didn't believe it. But it was it's like a video game, right? So like level 1 was becoming the youngest manager in company history. So at 18 years old, I became the youngest manager in company history. That now unlocked a new level of belief. And now I'm like, well, wait a minute. Maybe I could make 100 grand a year by the age of 21. So then at 21 years old, I made 150 grand. So now that unlocked a new level. It's like a video game.
Sure.
More belief. Oh, well, shoot, maybe I could make 350 grand. Then I made 350 grand. Then it's like, maybe I could make $500,000. Boom, unlock that. And when I made $500,000, now I started to believe, well, shoot, maybe I can make $1 million. No different than when I bought my first house, right? First I bought my mom's house. I bought her a $150,000 house. Then I bought her a $300,000 house. And then I bought myself a house and it was $1 million. And I was scared. I was like, man, can I afford it? Can I not? I'm going to try it. It's the only way you'll believe something in your heart is if you try it. And I tried it. And then I'm like, whoa, I was able to afford $1 million house. Now that unlocked a new level of belief. But again, if you let the fear paralyze you, you'll never step into the arena of uncertainty of taking on something that demands more than you think you're worth. And if you never take on something that demands more than you think you're worth because you're scared, then you'll never experience it. And if you never experience it, you'll never believe it. So that's the importance for me. I think one of the biggest secrets I could give anyone is to continue to try new things that scare the crap out of you. Because when you succeed at it, it now untaps a new level of belief. And again, for me, that fear, when your dream is big enough, if it's big enough, it should be so big that you have to tap into faith because you realize you can't do it by yourself. And then when you know that you have faith on your side, you're okay stepping into that arena of uncertainty. But if your dream isn't big enough, why would you want to step into the arena of uncertainty.
Absolutely. Makes perfect sense. It's almost like delusional optimism. That's something I talk about a lot. For me, growing up, I had no idea what I wanted to do.
Right.
You know, in school, everyone's like, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. And I was like, I honestly have no idea. Like, that's kind of crazy. These kids know at like 5 years old what they want to be. But my parents would always ask me that. And I would tell them, I'm going to be rich.
Yeah.
And they said, how do you know? And I said, I just know. So I feel that personally, I've always operated from a place of delusional optimism, but it's always worked out.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course you have that fear deep down. You're afraid, what if it doesn't work out? But I feel like you don't even give yourself the option. Like you said, you buy the car, you buy the house. Why someone else and not me? Right? So completely agree. And that's kind of how I choose to live my day-to-day life. And I tell my reps too, you know, when they say, what if I can't afford to do this? Or what if it doesn't work out? Why give yourself the option to fail? Burn the ships.
Yeah, burn the ships.
Just do it. So do you think, I know obviously you have the story of growing up with the trauma and the struggle and that kind of fueling you up to where you are now. And a lot of great leaders and successful entrepreneurs have a story that might be similar or they've gone through some trials themselves. Do you think that trauma creates better leaders because they have more of a chip on their shoulder?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think when I look at the trauma that I had to go through as a kid, of just our home would get raided by law enforcement once every year. And when that would happen, hopefully you've never been involved in a raid, but when a raid happens, what happens is they kick the door down, they come in with guns drawn, and then they start flipping your whole house upside down. A lot of yelling, a lot of screaming. So while that was happening, I had to remain calm under pressure. And the reason I had to remain calm under all that pressure was because I wanted my mom to feel okay. Because when she was on the floor being handcuffed, she was screaming for my name. And I was just like, it's okay, Mom. I'm good.
Yeah.
And I think that helped me now, because I think one of my greatest gifts is I'm calm under pressure.
Sure.
And that helped, I think, tremendously. I've also have always put myself in these pressure situations that have sort of increased my urgency level and have sort of, I think when you have this urgency level that I talk about, another way to look at it is it's a necessity level, which is a sudden willingness that untaps this ability that you did not know you even had. But that only comes if you're putting yourself in a pressure situation. See, I think low stress is low performance. And that's why for me, I've always leveraged the most amount of pressure on me so that I could perform at the highest level. Because it's like to your point, you burn the ships. All of a sudden, man, this thing needs to get done. It's going to get done no matter what. But, you know, the key to like buying the homes that I bought and the first nice car that I bought myself, my mom's first house when I told her I was going to buy it in 90 days. That's an example of putting myself in a pressure situation. Because now I was like, man, I just told the person I love the most that I was going to buy her this house in 90 days. There's no way in hell that I'm not going to come through on that promise. So it was this pressure situation that kept me knocking till 10:30 at night because it was going to happen, right? So I guess, disclaimer to putting yourself in a pressure situation is that you have to be good with keeping the promises that you make to yourself. If you don't keep the promises that you make to yourself, then you will fold under pressure, right? I think one of the greatest things about, for me, I started off this podcast talking about how I got obsessed with repetition, right? I think one of the good things about repetition is you will respond reflexively to what you do. So whatever you do repetitively, you will respond reflexively under pressure. Whatever you do repetitively, you will respond reflexively under pressure. That's why good habits matter. because when the heat is on, when the pressure is on, you will revert back to your habits. So if your habits are, I have massive work ethic, I have unwavering faith, I have self-discipline, I have perseverance, I'm about integrity when the pressure is on, then those are good habits to have, because habits are reflexive, right? But imagine if your habit was always quitting. Oh, it's getting hard, so I'm going to quit. It's getting hard, so I'm going to go do something else. It's getting hard, so I'm just going to, I guess my dreams aren't made to happen, right? Then that's the habit that you develop, right? So again, pressure is good. Problems are good. Going through pain is good, because when you stand in the pain, what happens is you'll develop the muscles that you'll need when things get harder. And that's why you don't want things to be so easy. If things are too easy for you, when life punches you in the face, you won't develop the muscles, you won't have the muscles that you need when life punches you in the face. And the only way that you build those muscles is by standing in the pain and going through it versus running away from it. That's why one of the greatest ease, I think, is one of the greatest threats to progress, even more than hardship, right? Hardship is actually good, because if you're used to doing hard things, then you'll be able to sustain success for a very long time, because life and pain are inseparable. Like, you're gonna have to go through pain in life. It's inevitable.
Absolutely. But I agree. Everything happens for a reason. And it's like, I view every negative, right? Maybe it's not, but that happens to me in my life, whether it's sad or confusing or painful, I always see it now as a growth opportunity, for one, and two, a vehicle leading me to where I'm supposed to be, right? Maybe you're not supposed to be in the place you're in, but you're comfortable. But if you don't go through that uncomfortable period or period of pain, you won't actually make it to that next level, like you said. So once you attain success, I'm sure you've experienced this, there might be people who become somewhat of like a hater, they're negative, or perhaps someone that shouldn't be in your life. Why is it that those people typically are negative from a position that's less than where you are currently? Why do people typically hate from below as opposed to people who've accomplished more? I've noticed, and I tell my reps this as well, once they start to make money, once they start to grow within the industry, they might have people from, say, their hometown or an old friend who starts to be kind of negative towards them when initially they were supporting them. Why is that, do you think?
Yeah, I think when you get to new levels of success, the resistance will come at you harder, because it's going to try to bring you back down, right? It goes back to you self-sabotaging yourself. Like, once you start to have a lot of success, you have to be very intentional about people trying to bring you down, or more importantly than people, your subconscious mind will figure out ways to bring you back down. And some of those times, the way that the subconscious mind does that is by letting people get to you. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because again, your subconscious mind is always going to prove itself correct. So if you're having all this success and your mind can't accept it, meaning your subconscious mind can't accept it because it just thinks you've surpassed your self-worth, then it's going to figure out a way to bring you back down to what you really think you're worth. So you could be on your way to $1 million a year, right? But if your self-worth is 200, because that's the most money you've ever made, then you'll self-sabotage yourself back to 200. And the way you do it is your subconscious mind will start making up little excuses on why you're going to self-sabotage yourself. You won't even know you're doing it. It'll just be like, you'll let somebody from your past come back into your life, even though you know that this guy's going to bring you back down, right? You're succeeding, you're kicking ass, and all of a sudden this old boyfriend that always effed everything, comes back in your life, and you know he's going to do it, and you still let him. That's your subconscious mind self-sabotaging you, right?
Yeah.
So I've seen a lot of, you know, I won't mention their name, but I've seen a lot of women do that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just an example of it, right? And I've seen men do it too.
Sure, sure. So do you think then, in order to leave your old life behind in honor of your new one, that period in between, I think it was Erwin McManus that I heard say this recently on a podcast, I think maybe the one that you guys did together, but there's a period of loneliness between your old life and your new life.
Yeah.
Do you agree with that?
100%. I think that was me that said it.
Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah. So I think what happens is association is a big deal of building your identity, right? So we talked about your self-worth and you always coming back down to what you really think you're worth. So the question is, well, how do I build my self-worth? Well, one, we've already covered, which is by putting yourself in circumstances that demand more than you think you're worth and then succeeding at it. The other one is association. Just like our parents told us, you are who you associate yourself with. And it's 100% true, right? So once you start hanging out with people that are doing better than you, you should want to do that because that's going to get you to want to do bigger things, right? Because one of the beauties about hanging out with people that are doing better than you is you start to realize they're not that special. They're just like you. And you're like, well, I'm just like them. I should be just as successful as... Yeah, exactly. So you start thinking that way, right? The problem is that successful people are also trying to do the same thing. They're trying to level up, right? So what happens is you sort of have to go through a lonely time because in one hand, you have to eliminate all of your negative friends that are just being negative all the time. And then on the other hand, all the people that you want to hang out with aren't going to have time for you because they're busy doing their thing. So what happens is you go through a very lonely time, but that's okay because when you're starting from the bottom, when you're starting from scratch, you have to be obsessed with your work. And there really isn't time for a social life. And that's when you put in the work. And the beauty of it is once you have success, all those people that you were aspiring to be friends with are all going to come to you because people are going to be attracted to people like them.
Law of attraction.
It's the law of attraction. So you'll just start attracting those people. Now, I guess a hack to that is, you know, people talk about mentors and stuff. And Erwin McManus is one of my mentors. Ed Milet is one of my mentors. They both become very, very close friends of mine.
Sure.
But I've never really talked business with them. And that's because I've studied them without even having to ask them questions. I already know if I want the answers, where to find them. Like I'll just study their stuff. Right. And I'm relentlessly always studying their things and what their success principles have been. And that's why for me, personal development for our company is such a big deal because personal development allows you to associate with some of the most successful people in the world. And when you start taking their experiences and you start to apply them, in a matter of years, you can manifest them. So this whole excuse of, oh, Edwin, that's great, but I don't have any people that I know that are making millions of dollars a year. Yeah, you do. Find them on a YouTube channel. Find them on one of their books, and you start studying them. Again, no different than when I started studying that #1 sales rep at the call center. I just studied everything. I studied the way he would sit. I studied the way his tonality, the way he would speak. I did that when I first started knocking doors. I'd walk like them. I'd talk like them. I would hold the clipboard. Back then we had clipboards.
Right.
I would hold the clipboard. I would teach guys to hold the clipboard just like I did. I would teach agents how to put their pin on their ear. And it's all these little details that people didn't think mattered. And that's the way I would train them. I would train them to become just like me. So this whole, there's people that say, well, I don't want to say it just like that person because then I'm going to sound like a robot. I think that's a cop out of being lazy, because when you learn something word for word, you won't sound like a robot after a while, right? It goes back to memorizing it, internalizing it, and then personalizing it, right? You won't even know that it's a script.
Yeah.
Because you've said it so many times that it's just comes out natural.
Absolutely. I remember when I first started at Skyline, my trainer would make me say our pitch before I got out of the car, when I got back in the car, while we were walking to the door, and I was dreaming that pitch.
Yeah.
But it's true. I remember one day I was knocking and it just clicked. I knew it verbatim, but then I started to personalize.
Yeah.
Right? So I had memorized, I internalized, and then I was personalizing, adding little things in that matched my personality that then helped me connect better with the customer. So completely agree with that. And that's something I still tell my reps to this day is memorize, internalize, personalize. It makes perfect sense. But with that said, Edwin, you have to start over today with zero money, connections, no platform, and you're given $1,000 to rebuild everything. Where would you start first?
I'd start selling again.
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of sales, is that it allows you to make the most money, right? And money's not everything, but it's a byproduct to give you a lot more options, to give you a lot more opportunities. And I think money gives you power. And I think power is good because you can be a force for good if you have power. And I think, unfortunately, there's this bad misconception that money is a bad thing. Money just makes you a megaphone of what you are, right? So if you're a person of greed, you'll just be even greedier, right? If you're a person that's arrogant, you'll become more arrogant. But if you're humble, you'll just become more humble. If you're generous, you'll just be even more generous, right? So for me, I know one of the things that inspires me is, I want to become more successful. I want to become more powerful so I could be more of a source for good, because I want to give more. I want to give people more of the opportunity I want to inspire people. The pursuit of greatness is your biggest act of service, because when you continue to do great things, now you're giving people hope that their life can change. When you change your life for the better, it gives people the faith, the hope that their life can change. So for me, I'd start with sales, and I'd go back to the beginning, right? Which is, every time things have gotten hard for me, there's been a couple times where I've almost lost a business. And every time things get tough, because again, things are always what happens in life is things get easy, but nothing that's easy ever lasts. So it's just like this cycle. They'll be easy for a while and then it'll get hard. But the problem is, when it gets hard, people run. But if you actually stay in the pain and go through that resistance, it gets even easier. And then it gets hard again. And then you fight through the resistance, and then it gets even easier again, right? So every time that things have gotten hard, I go back to what I've always done, which is outwork everybody. I go back to repetition. I go back to running big numbers. I think the reason people don't buy from you is because you look desperate, right? And what happens is, if you don't have enough presentations, if you don't have enough leads, if you don't have enough customers, what happens is then the customer becomes scarce. The customer becomes so valuable to you that now you look desperate, because you're like, man, I can't lose this customer, because this is the way I got to feed my family. Now let's look at the opposite. You have an abundance of leads. You have an abundance of recruits. And the reason you have an abundance of that is because you've continued to just plant seeds, and you continue to outwork the competition. Now you have a ton of leads. And because you have a ton of leads, now the scarcity is not the leads, it's your personal time. So now, because your time is so scarce, guess who becomes valuable? You do. Now you don't look desperate anymore, right? Now, if you wanted to, you can take this, you could actually take it away from them. And people always want what they can't have, right?
Right.
And that only happens when you have, for me, when I run big numbers. So, and I think, again, back to repetition, what I notice, most people are always trying to get creative so that they don't have to work as hard. And they're constantly looking at how to change things. And sometimes that might work, but for the most part, it doesn't work. So when I don't want to leave things to chance and I just need to make things happen, I just hit it with all kinds of repetition. And I run large numbers. And again, instead of getting fatigued by it, I get energized by it. Most people do the opposite. It's like they're doing great. It's like, okay, how can I make my life easier on myself? Let me change this. Let me change that. And again, it could work sometimes, but more often than not, it doesn't. And then you get your butt kicked.
Absolutely. So kind of changing the tone a little bit. I know this is something that comes up quite a bit, but being on Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, when I first started working for Skyline, I had no idea. And my roommate at the time saw, I had just bought my Tesla and he shared it to your story and she almost passed out. She was like, wait, that's Teddy's husband. He's on Real Housewives. I was like, wait, what do you mean? So that's when I found out, because I knew you from the sales side of it, right? Do you think that being on the show portrays you guys accurately? And do you think it's improved your life in any way? And what's kind of also shocked you about being on the show?
So yeah, the show will edit you however they want you to come out. Like, you know, I remember the first year they made us come out really, really well. And there was times where they didn't have to, because there was times where we had some fights. But they never showed that because they wanted you to see what they wanted you to see, right? So, but that's television. In regards to the show helping us out, it helped me tremendously in that it allowed me to glamorize what we do for a living, because before, I never wanted to talk about my success. So the beauty about the show is that the show did it for me. And I think there's something to be said when you have third-party verification, where you don't have to talk about it, but there's other people talking about it. But because of that show, I was sort of forced to tell my story. And because of that, I had to start working on telling my story. So that's how I went back to studying and studying on the mindset and working on personal development. That was one of the reasons, right? You have to have a reason that makes you want to do it. So part of it was, when we got the show, I was also going through one of the toughest times in my life with that imposter syndrome, where the company was becoming so successful that I didn't really believe that I deserved the success that I was having. So I was going through that. I started to self-sabotage my personal life. So that's the thing. When you start to self-sabotage, it's not just self-sabotaging your business. You start self-sabotaging your personal life, your family life. And the show, believe it or not, kind of helped me get back into, hey, you got to fix some stuff, or the whole world's going to know that you've been screwing up big time. So in many ways, it helped me get back into just being disciplined and working on things that I wasn't working on at the time.
Absolutely.
And, you know, when you don't do something for a long time, you'll start to dislike it. And when you start working on things, like for me, it made me start working on my marriage again. And I realized, wow, I like my marriage, right? But if you don't work on it, you'll start to dislike it, right? It's the same thing with fitness. If you haven't touched the gym in 15 years, I guarantee you hate the gym, right? So you got to start working on it slowly but surely, and just make incremental improvements in those areas of your life. So like with me, I don't think there's such a thing as balance, because I think if you want to be great at an area of your life, you have to get obsessed with it. But the good news is that during your lifetime, different areas of your life will spike. And the key is to identify what areas of your life aren't spiking and just make incremental improvements in those areas. Because as long as you're growing, you're not dying. And I think the mistake that I've made, and I think I see a lot of people make, is you allow an area of your life to continue to, you allow an area of your life to die off. So like those 4 pillars that I always talk about, right? The faith, family, finance, fitness, right? If you allow one of those pillars to crumble because you stop working on it, it can set off all the other pillars to come crumbling down. So for me, I had let the pillar of the fitness of the mind crumble because I hadn't worked on it for such a long time, 20 years I hadn't worked on it. So when that thing came crumbling down, it set off all the other pillars to come crumbling down. My family pillar almost came crumbling down. My business almost came crumbling down. So that's why you want to continue to work in different areas of your life, just a tiny bit. And the last thing you want to do is go cold turkey and not stop and just stop working on an area of your life, because eventually you'll dislike it and you won't do it. And eventually it could cause you, again, fitness, you stop working on your body, eventually it's going to get to you and it could kill everything off.
Yeah. What's one piece of advice that you would give a young entrepreneur with the dream to kind of eliminate a learning curve that you may have hit and help them accelerate a bit faster, or at least be a bit more confident in themselves?
So I think association is probably the biggest key. I wish I would have, I had, obviously the guy that helped me start the business, and he was a big help at the beginning, but then 5 years when he got out of the business and he decided to get into land developing, I just kind of kept going by myself. And I didn't have a mentor for I didn't have a mentor for probably 15 years. And I had to figure things out on my own. And it took me longer than I think it would have if I just would have had that mentor. And again, you don't have to have that mentor like always be talking to you. You can learn about them. I mean, back in early 2000s, late 90s, it was a little harder to get access to people. But like now you have no excuse on why you don't have a mentor, because you can easily look them up and learn everything you need to learn about them.
Sure. When I was a new rep and just barely starting, and I actually found these DMs the other day, the first ones you ever sent me kind of congratulating me. Is there something that you look for in a rookie, a new rep, that's kind of that spark that lets you know they're going to be good? Because I know for me, when I really didn't have much to offer the company yet, so I thought, you were still texting, still reaching out. And I see that a lot when it comes to brand new people. You reach out to them frequently. So is there something you look for to differentiate someone who you think will be successful within the company that you want to kind of pour into?
It's a great question. I think number one for me is just the desire to want to do something great with their life. I think for me, I want to help people that want to do something great. I like underdogs because it reminds me a lot about myself. I like people that that I know have these gifts that can make them special, but they just don't realize they have them. Because again, that was my story as well.
Right.
Like, it took me a while to figure it out. And again, going back to the leadership stuff, I think one of the greatest things you could do as a leader is be a gift finder and help people unlock what those gifts are. I thought with you, like from the beginning, I thought you were an excellent communicator. And I'm like, man, this girl could be great influence. I also saw your ability to train, which that is probably the hardest thing to do, is train people, because you could easily sell. Like people could sell, and especially because if you're witty and if you just have that gift where you can talk, like you can sell and win people over. But training's a little different because not everybody comes with that gift. Like I was one of them. Like I didn't naturally have these things. So I needed a system. And to become a good trainer, you need a good system, you need a good process, and something that you can duplicate. And you almost have to take a little bit of the personality away. That's why you see so many great salespeople. Mm-hmm. They can't train to save their lives. And the reason they can't train is because they're selling with personality, right? And you got to be able to sell without having to use so much of your personality, because then you can go to the masses. Then you can train somebody that maybe doesn't have personality. You know, I think one of the greatest gifts that someone can give you as a trainer is, man, she's not even that good. I could do better than her. That means that you did a great job in training them because you just made them believe that they can do better than you, right? But if all of a sudden they go out and they see you and you just look like God in front of them because you're just the best salesperson ever,
yeah,
then they're going to be like, I could never do that.
That looks so complicated.
That looks so complicated. I'm out.
Yep.
But if you can make it so dumb proof that they're like, that's it.
Yep.
Wow. I'm way better than this girl.
Yeah.
I'm way better than this dude. I can run circles around this dude. Now you know you're a badass trainer, right? And you have to be humble enough to not have to show off like you're the greatest thing, you know, greatest salesperson that ever lived, but just make it simple and where you can replicate it.
Yeah, that's very reaffirming too. I feel like every time I take a rep out and they see a sale, they're like, oh, that looks so easy. You made it look so easy. And in my head, I'm like, well, girl, I don't know. It's not the easiest thing. It is a little bit hard, but the fact that I can make it look that way and they're not scared to go try it themselves, I think definitely helps them in their journey quite a bit. So in closing, what would you like to leave everyone with today as a message? Where can they find you and what's next for you?
Yeah, so I think as a message, my thing has always been to dream big, right? And to continue to go after becoming the best version of yourself. And that's always going to come with resistance. And I think the best skill sets you can ever develop are grit, our fortitude, and our resiliency. And the only way that you could build those skill sets is by standing in the pain and pushing forward. And when you do that, I think the great thing that comes out with is that's how you build grit. Like those skill sets, you can't develop them. I mean, you're not born with them. You have to develop them. And the way you develop them is by going through that resistance, right? And those three skill sets, no one could ever take away from you. And because of that, you'll sustain success for a long time, because life's always going to punch you in the face, always. And if you're not used to doing those hard things, when life punches you in the face, you're going to get derailed and you're going to self-sabotage, right? So embrace the suck, embrace the pain. One of the great things when you do it, in addition to building those skill sets, is you're building a great story that now is going to impact many, many people. You know, if you want to impress people, talk about your success. But if you want to impact people, then talk about your failures. And when you're going through those failures, again, you're only defined by your failure if you decide to stay down. But if you get back up, then you'll be defined by what you overcame, not by what overtook you. So just know that and embrace the pain that sometimes you're gonna have to go through, because life and pain are inseparable.
Absolutely.
And the more you can understand that, the longer that you'll sustain success for a long time.
Well, Thank you so much, Edwin.
Yeah.
This was phenomenal. I am so blessed to be here and yet again for the job opportunity and just to have you as a mentor in my life. So thank you for your time today.
Well, by the way, I told you this off camera, but
Yes.
you have done a great job of preparation. I mean, all of your notes. I mean, this is what makes you successful.
I appreciate that.
How you do anything is how you do everything is how you do any. How's it go? How you do anything is how you do everything, right?
Thank you.
So very impressed with your journalism skills. I think you found yourself a good little profession here.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Never going to give up alarms. However, a nice, passion project. So again, thank you for your time.
It's a good way to impact people.
Yeah. And that's the thing, spreading a message to a wider audience. I think it's really cool being able to help people through my job in this company, but then being able to even spread that message to a wider audience of things that you might go through in the job or even outside of it. And through this too, a lot of people have reached out about the job and wanting to start. So I think it's a really great marriage of the two.
Yeah.
But thank you guys so much for tuning into Secured Sessions, the podcast with no niche. Remember to follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Apple Music, and Spotify to see which big name we have on next. Love you guys so much. Until next time.